Good evening. You're watching The Digital Age. I'm Jim Zirin. James Goodale is off this week. Our topic tonight is national intelligence. Last month, President Bush appointed a career diplomat, John Negroponte, to be the first director of national intelligence, a new post. Ambassador Negroponte will have extraordinary authority and responsibilities. The FBI, the CIA, National Security Agency, and Homeland Security will all report to him. The Director of National Intelligence came as a result of new legislation enacted in December, signed into law in December of last year, upon the recommendation of the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States, the 9/11 Commission. The question before us is whether the Director of National Intelligence will prove to be effective. More importantly, will the institution make us safer? And here to discuss the issue with us tonight is the former distinguished governor of the state of New Jersey, the Honorable Thomas H. Kean, who was the chairman of the 9/11 Commission. Tom Kean, welcome.
Thank you, Jim.
Now, you supported intelligence reform.
Yeah, we did, and we did it basically out of the events of 9/11. We saw the tragedy that occurred, we studied the tragedy, and we tried to take lessons from it. What didn't work, and did that contribute to the tremendous number of deaths and what happened? And we thought one of the great failures, and there were a number of failures, but the great failure was the failure of intelligence. Our agencies didn't operate correctly, they didn't share information with one another, and they let us down. And this is an attempt to get a structure in place where good people can work and where those kind of problems won't occur again.
Well, let's talk about the structure. Negroponte reports directly to the president. Below him, you have the CIA, you have a number of intelligence agencies that previously reported to the Department of Defense. Will the president be denied competing assessments, a minority view, if you will, or will it all be watered over by the DNI, who'll present just one consensus view?
Well, there was only one person reporting to the president before this, and it was the director of the CIA, and he was our chief intelligence officer. And he met every morning with the president for breakfast. It was President Bush. President Clinton met a little less often, but nevertheless met with him on a regular basis. He represented all the intelligence assessments. He'd bring them together and he'd report to the president. The problem was he was head of the CIA. Now, he was supposed to control that agency, even though he only controlled 20% of the budget. He was also supposed to be chief intelligence officer, even though he had no control of any of the other agencies. And he was also supposed to be the president's chief advisor on intelligence. So nobody did that job well. Nobody. And nobody was in control. Nobody was managing information. Nobody was bringing it together. So what we've recommended is that you have a director of national intelligence reporting directly to the president, supervising the other intelligence agencies. That frees up the head of the CIA, Portegas, to fix the CIA, which the previous director of the CIA said would take 5 years of full-time work. So that's what he's doing. I think the information is going to be shared in centers of information which are right below the director. At these centers, there will be a center on, well, whatever the president designates. Let's say a center on nuclear proliferation. On that center will be various representatives from the various agencies sharing together the information they have on that particular threat. They will then bring this information, after sharing it, forward to the Director of National Intelligence, who will present to the President. And there may be a center on Al-Qaeda, there may be a center on several other things. But the idea is at the second level, these people are now talking to each other, and the Director of National Intelligence can then take that information, filter it out, get it to the President.
And what is his precise authority? Will he have the power to hire and fire the heads of the agencies under him?
Well, if those agencies are simply appointees, he will have the power to hire and fire, and most importantly, the power of the budget.
Yes.
But he's got to have full support of the president in that. And one of the things that we said when this position was being considered is it doesn't work unless the person has the complete confidence of the president. Now, if the person has a complete confidence of the president, then all this other authority is going to work.
Yes.
The president has, for instance, you can have terrible problems in intelligence. You know, Bill Clinton was president for 8 years. After his first year in office, he never saw Louis Freeh, the head of the FBI.
He never saw Jim Woolsey either.
Yeah, they never met. I mean, that's crazy.
Yes.
And Freeh tore up his White House pass. He was so mad at the president at the first year over something. He never went back. President never called him back. And so that was an agency that was sort of off on its own for that period. That won't happen again.
There was that apocryphal story, perhaps, when a Cessna crashed on the White House lawn. They said it was Woolsey trying to get an appointment with Clinton.
Maybe right. But that was the kind of thing.
Yes.
And there are terrible stories from 9/11. I mean, there was a guy, two terrorists called Hazmi and Mittar. They were part of the attack on Nicole. The CIA tracked them, got them as far as Bangkok. They had a meeting with some other terrorists in Bangkok. Then the CIA lost them, and they were looking for them. We now know they went to Bangkok, and then they ended up in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, even though they're on a big CIA want list, they lived openly, under their own names, got credit cards under their own names, driver's licenses under their own names, and we didn't find out about this till after 9/11. The reason was the CIA didn't share with the FBI. And so the FBI did domestically. CIA was looking all around the world for these guys. Here they were in the United States.
So the government didn't know what it knew.
No, and that's been the problem. I can give you other examples of the same kind of thing, of agencies just not sharing information, and therefore things didn't get taken care of.
Well, since we are the digital age, intelligence sharing was a very important part of your report, and you recommended that the various agencies bring their activities into the information age. But recently we read that the FBI was denied funds to upgrade its IT system.
Well, that's got to change. I mean, first of all, the FBI, when they testified before us, told us so within about a year of having their system already upgraded. So we got a little bad information there, which because the FBI has a central computer where all this stuff goes on, and if there's a name that people are looking for, it should be there, and should be put in a watch list, and should be followed, and all the information should come up. It doesn't. Now, if the government has been totally unable to do this, and they seem to have been, it's not just the money, it's the government just seems unable to put it together. There are private firms who can do it. So there's got to be a public-private partnership, I think. The government has got to go out to a private firm, get them to put in place for the FBI, get the best possible information network, because without it, we're not going to find these guys when they're running around.
Now, just going back to the Director of National Intelligence, your report stressed that he has to have budgetary authority, and indeed now he has 80% of the budgetary authority. Why is this so important?
Because that's everything in Washington. If you don't control the budget, you control nothing. Because people, that's how the government operates. If you want to stress one particular area instead of another area, that area's got to be funded. And maybe the funds are going to come from the other area, but you've got to be able to move money around to make sure it's being spent most effectively. And that, by the way, is also true of the Congress. One of the real problems in budgetary authority right now is that the intelligence committees, which have oversight and supervise the intelligence agencies, the Congress failed before 9/11. The committees don't have budget authority. The authority is over with the Armed Services Committee, so that these guys don't pay any attention to the Intelligence Committee. They couldn't care less about them because the budget authority is over in the Armed Services Committee.
Almost a shell game. We have an enormous number of committees with jurisdiction over the various areas where Ambassador Negroponte will have authority.
Yeah.
And one of them is Homeland Security, and I think Governor Ridge said he spent 80% of his time testifying before various committees of Congress. Now, is Ambassador Negroponte going to be doing that as well?
No, I think he's more limited, but the Department of Homeland Security has still got the problem. Department of Homeland Security reports to 88 congressional committees. Now, think about it. Now, I had to testify before 20 of them as head of the 9/11 Commission. It took me a lot of time to prepare that testimony. It took me a lot of time to sit and testify. I was before one committee for 5 hours testifying at one. That's one committee, and because it took time to prepare for it. Just think of reporting to 88 different committees. One, it takes an enormous amount of time and energy. Secondly, it's time taken away from the job you're supposed to be doing, which is protecting you and I. So it's a crazy system, and Congress has passed this bill to reform intelligence in the executive. They've done nothing to reform themselves, and that's the next step.
Well, is there any prospect that that'll be done?
Oh yeah, there are good congressmen who are willing to support it. Joe Lieberman's one of them, John McCain's another, Carol Maloney in the House. I mean, there are a number of people who are working on it, but some of the older people in Congress, the people who've been around for 25, 30 years, don't like change. And they really don't like to give up their committee jurisdiction. So even though it may be 88 committees, every one of them wants to say, I had the head of Homeland Security before my committee, and I saw him. And they don't want to give that up. Well, they got to give it up because it's, particularly in the intelligence area, because you and I can't supervise intelligence. It's secret. So if they're not doing oversight, nobody's doing oversight. And that was happening before 9/11, and it can't continue to happen any longer.
And while Congress is examining itself, you also have another presidential commission headed by former Judge Silberman, which is reassessing the role of the Director of National Intelligence. What do you expect to come out of that?
Well, I don't know. Actually, I've offered to come down, sit down with Judge Silverman and Chuck Robb, who's the co-chairman, former Senator Robb, and see if we can be of any help to them. I think their job really was to find out what went wrong with the weapons of mass destruction. I mean, why did every intelligence agency tell two presidents that there were clearly weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and we haven't been able to find them? That's their purpose. But in looking at that, they're looking at the failure of intelligence again, as we were. So they got to look at what we've done, look at the agencies that have been set up, make their own determinations, and probably look, they've got an advantage. Now it's been set up. Well, how is it working? Or is it working yet? I mean, some of it, unfortunately, it took a long time to find Ambassador Negroponte, and I don't think he's going to take office until May. That's a long time, and then he's got to set up these centers, he's got to get to know people, he's got to get his budget, he's got to get all of that. So they've got to look and see what's working and what's not working.
Now, intelligence involves gathering information, analyzing it, and traditionally, under the umbrella of the CIA, it's also involved covert operations, which George Tenet expanded during his tenure there, no pun intended. And your report recommended that paramilitary operations, covert operations, be taken away from the Central Intelligence Agency and be given to the Department of Defense, various branches of the armed forces. Now, that is not in the new bill.
No, it's not in the new bill. We thought.
Was that a mistake?
I think so, but probably not a major one. We reported that just because if it's a military in a sense, we thought now with the special forces, the military just has a much greater capability to do it. And you can get in crazy operations with the CIA sometimes that aren't really authorized by the civilian authority, and you've had them in the past, and they've gotten the CIA and the country into some trouble.
Well, we thought it was church revelations.
Yeah, we thought it was better to have those under the Department of Defense than under the military, but it's not we're going to need those. The real problem with all the CIA is the diversity. I mean, we've got to get some greater language skills, got to get some more diverse people in there. We've got to really be able, when the CIA came before us, I looked at the people who came before us, and they looked like you and I. And we're not going to infiltrate bin Laden. We're just not going to do it. And so, we got to diversify that organization.
But is there a problem getting clearances for Arabic-speaking agents who perhaps have families still in the Muslim world?
I don't think. I think the first problem is recruiting. I think if we have the right people, I don't think clearances will be a problem. But all our clearances take a while. I mean, my own clearances took a while, and it takes too long, really. And they ask you too many questions, and too many questions are left over from the Cold War. They're just not really ones they need to be asking people anymore. But I think if we go out and recruit properly, then I think we'll have the language speakers. This is a wonderfully diverse country, and we've got people here who speak every language in the world. And many of them have been here now a generation or two. Many of them are real proud of being in this country, and I think we've just got to get those into the services.
Now, critics of intelligence reform say that the authority of the Director of National Intelligence isn't really spelled out although Senator Rockefeller says that's a plus, because where you have a vacuum, then he can work around it and assume new powers and new responsibilities. What do you think of that debate?
We suggested spelling it out a little bit more. The Congress decided not to. And I understand that. There's enough spelling out so we're convinced that our recommendations can be implemented and this fellow can do his job. But again, that makes it so important that he has the full support of the president. Because if you're trying to take implied powers and make them specific, then the president better be behind you, because he's going to run into folks. I mean, he's going to, sooner or later, he's going to run into Don Rumsfeld. And he's going to be doing something that Rumsfeld thinks is really the Department of Defense. And then the president's got to step forward and say, hey, no, it's not. This is intelligence. This is this fellow's job. And without that presidential support, he's going to have problems.
Now, you have Ambassador Negroponte in this plenipotentiary position. And he has responsibility for the FBI, law enforcement. He has responsibility for the CIA, which is going to include, at least for the moment, covert operations. He has the awesome responsibility of protecting the American homeland. Can anyone possibly discharge this function? Is there any human being who can?
Well, there's got to be some kind of responsibility. I mean, when we interviewed people and tried to determine who was responsible for what before 9/11, we'd say, well, who is responsible in the end? Who's making the decisions? Who's in charge? And you get this blank look, and then after a while, people would usually say, well, the president. Well, the president's responsible for everybody. That's a non-answer. There really wasn't anybody in charge. So there was nobody putting all these various threads together. There was nobody taking responsibility. There was nobody managing cases. And that's why things slipped through, and we had so many of these problems with 9/11 and other factors, really.
I wanted to ask you about your report, because you really worked on developing this remarkable document over a considerable period of time. It was more than a year, wasn't it?
Yes.
And now, it appears that there are portions of the report which remain classified. At least on February 10th, the New York Times said that in a classified section of the report, which everybody hopes will be released shortly, according to the paper, there were 52 warnings given to the FAA of the possibility of hijacking of airplanes in the United States, flying them into buildings, and the like. And while there was nothing definite, certainly the concept was out there. Now, that's contrary to what we had been led to believe by officials of the administration. Is there more to the report that's going to come out, and is it going to be material? Is it going to change any of the basic recommendations?
No, what this is we put out our report, and we worked very hard to make sure in that book and in that report there are no redactions, no censorship. The government wasn't blanking anything out. We had to negotiate for a lot of that, but we got everything cleared. After that, we said there's so much material we have, we're going to issue monographs, which are extensions of a lot of sections of the report, which just give detail so that the public can learn more. We issued 3 of those before we went out of existence. The last one was this one on the FAA. We turned it over to the administration 2 days, I think, before we went out of existence in August. They never got back to us as far as when they were going to release it, what redactions were going to happen, nothing. Now, all of a sudden, they sort of quietly turned it over to the Library of Congress, and a couple of news journals found out about it, and we got to tell us. And meanwhile, they had redacted or censored large sections of it. I will tell you that I know what was censored, and I will tell you it ought not to have been censored. There is some of what's been censored was from public testimony before the commission, others from reports that you and I have both read, but it was stuff that was embarrassing to the agency. Not classified, but embarrassing.
To the FAA?
Yeah, they should never censor things that are simply embarrassing. There's nothing that should have been classified.
I think your report suggested that the security head of the FAA never looked at the watch list that the CIA had prepared.
Yeah.
So you have all these human failures, systemic failures, and the like.
Yeah, all the conclusions are in the report.
Yes.
This monograph is simply the research materials that back up the materials, and the conclusions are already in the report. But they should be public, and we've written, frankly, to the administration and saying, please make them public.
Now, ironically enough, in a book called The River War about the Sudan in 1900, Churchill said the only hope for Western civilization and not being overrun by fanatic Islam was our superior technology. And your report suggests that we have to develop better technology to deal with terrorists. Of course, terrorists themselves have access to technology, cell phones, the internet. On 9/11, they knew how to turn off the transponders on the aircraft. And the question is, what do we really need to do with our technology to crack terrorist codes, to intercept terrorist communications? Are we really doing enough in that area?
No, we're not doing enough. There's a number of things we can do. One of the things is, one of the failures was immigration. A lot of these people got in, 13 out of the 19 shouldn't have been allowed into the country. They had forged visas or passports, easily identifiable marks that somebody should have said this is a likely terrorist and stopped them.
Oh, I didn't mention immigration is also going to report to Ambassador Negropont.
No.
No?
I don't think so. No, but no, immigration is reporting another direction.
That's another direction.
That stays where it is. But nevertheless, what we've recommended, and this is very much technology, is biometric identification. And the technology is there. It means when you go on a plane or something like that, you would be identified either by your fingerprints or your eyeballs or whatever. You wouldn't have to worry about phony, it would put out of business these people who forge passports and visas. Technology is there. European Union is working on it, and so are we. And we should move up that timetable. Now, this is the one part of our report which costs some money, but it is the one part of the report which may make us more safe than almost anything else. I mean, if you could walk into an airport and they know right away it's you, and it's you without question, instead of all this, taking your grandmother and searching her because she came up a certain number on a computer. That's sort of silly.
Well, surely the one signature of the terrorist is he needs to travel to do his work.
Yes.
His or her.
Yeah, and that's the time you catch him.
And that's the time you catch him.
That's right.
We had a number of opportunities to foil the 9/11 plot.
Yes, we did.
Where we let down our guard.
When
with these technological improvements, there certainly would be a better chance of catching them.
Oh, much, much better. And that's why, by the way, we're a little worried about with people in the European Union, because they've let down the borders.
Yes.
So, which is good in many senses, but it means terrorists can travel around a little more easily than they could otherwise. It's when they cross borders and when they travel that they're most vulnerable. And we've got to recognize that, and we've got to have the technology to be there and to catch them when they do that.
Now, we mentioned intercepting terrorist communications. Do you support the extension of the Patriot Act?
Parts of it. I think the Patriot Act, like any act, ought to be examined. There's parts of it, like for instance, a wall in the Justice Department wouldn't let the two sides of the Justice Department talk to each other. That was terrible.
That's intelligence and enforcement.
Yes, and the fact that that's been removed by the Patriot Act is very, very good. There are some areas of the Patriot Act that we should re-examine. We've suggested, and not suggested, it's now been passed into law. The President hasn't done it yet, but it's in the law, that he's supposed to appoint a Civil Liberties Board. And that Civil Liberties Board will be in the White House. The chairman and vice chairman will be confirmed by the Senate. And any time there's any kind of civil liberties problem with any of these new laws or regulations, they're supposed to flag it. And doesn't mean it's going to be stopped. Maybe you and I will look at that and say, all right, that's a trade-off we'll make. And another time we'll say, no, that's an intrusion on our liberties we're not going to allow. But they flag it and make it part of the debate. And we think that as far as the Patriot Act goes, as far as any other new laws of one kind or another, we've got to look at the civil liberties implications, and this Civil Liberties Board, we think, will make that possible.
Well, even the old laws, you have Jose Padilla, who was seized at O'Hare Airport, and they said that Mr. Comey said that he was planning a dirty bomb attack in Chicago, and he's been held without a lawyer and without charges ever since, and a federal judge has just ordered that he be released in 45 days if the government doesn't charge him. Would things like that be the responsibility of the new board?
Well, probably not. That's an individual case that the judge says actually is a violation of the law.
Yes.
This would be to look at the law before it was passed. In other words, if there was a law that Congress was looking at as part of the Patriot Act or anything else that would limit liberties that we take for granted in this country, they would flag it. They just would say, this is something you ought to look at again because it does take away a fundamental liberty. And then the Congress and the public can look at it and say, all right, we recognize that, but maybe we want the law anyway. Or they can say, no, that's something we're not willing to give up, and we're not going to vote for this law. That's the idea of the Civil Liberties Board, just so because there's nothing in there now that really looks at things from that point of view, and we think there ought to be.
The other area of the report, which I found quite striking, is that throughout the 1990s, there were many, many instances of handwriting on the wall that bin Laden was going to do this or something like it. And there were a number of acts against the United States which went unanswered. Do you think this was a factor? Do you think this emboldened him to do 9/11 and emboldens terrorists to do more?
He said it did. I mean, he said to his followers, one thing about bin Laden is you look and see what he's saying, and that's generally what he tries to do. And so, he issued a fatwa saying you should kill every American civilian or military right away, and every Muslim had a duty to do that. And then he bombed the embassies. And when he bombed the embassies, people caught him and said, don't you think what you did is wrong? He said, to kill crusaders and Jews, if that's a crime, then I'm a criminal. And I'm going to continue to do it. And then he did. And he said after, he was responsible for problems in Mogadishu with Black Hawk Down. We withdrew from the area after that Black Hawk Down. And he said, they withdrew. We attacked them and they withdrew. He looked at the Marine bombing of the barracks in Lebanon and said, we bombed the barracks and they withdrew. And he looked at these various occasions and said, they don't hit back. And so he felt that, we were soft and we were not going to take casualties, and that this emboldened him. There's no question about that. That's one of the failures. That and the failure of imagination, that we looked at all these various events leading up to 9/11 and never imagined 9/11. Tom Clancy did, but nobody in government did.
Maybe we need a department of eccentricity that'll figure out all these things they're going to do.
I said that at one point. We need, not a department, but we need a Tom Clancy. We need somebody sitting in government who's just all the time thinking ahead.
Or outside the box.
Yeah, outside the box. These are entrepreneurs, and they're going to think differently. And we've got to have somebody in government who's thinking differently also and anticipating these problems before they occur.
I think it's about time for a question. Will intelligence reform make us safer?
Yeah, it'll make us safer. It's not going to make us safe, but it'll make us safer. All these things we've recommended, all these things the government are doing, are going to ratchet it up so that we can sleep a little easier at night. But we've got to keep our guard up because we'll never be totally safe.
Well, I think that's all the time we have. Tom Kean, thank you for coming by. Thank you for coming by. Good evening. I'm Jim Zirin. Good night from the digital age.